What if everything you've been taught about God and money is backwards? What if the people God loved most, his inner circle, his chosen ones, the men he called friend, were all extremely wealthy, not comfortable, not blessed with enough, rich, generationally, embarrassingly, almost offensively rich? And what if your poverty isn't bringing you closer to him at all? That's going to bother some people. Good, it should. Because somewhere along the way, the church started teaching that money is dirty, that wanting less makes you more spiritual, that the godly life is the simple life, and by simple, they mean broke. But Genesis tells a completely different story. Abraham, the father of faith, the friend of God, was wealthier than most modern billionaires. Livestock, silver, gold, servants, land. Scripture says he was very rich, not content, not provided for. Very rich. Isaac, the miracle son, became so wealthy that entire nations envied him. Kings asked him to leave because his prosperity was intimidating their own people. One year he planted during a famine and reaped 100 times what he sowed. That's not luck, that's supernatural wealth multiplication. Jacob, the schemer who wrestled with God and became Israel, started with nothing but a walking stick. 20 years later, his flocks were so massive they had to be divided into camps. His wealth burst its banks. The man couldn't contain what God gave him. 3 men, 3 generations, all chosen by God, all radically, undeniably wealthy. Coincidence? The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. Proverbs 10:22. The blessing makes rich, not makes content, not makes spiritually fulfilled. The Hebrew word is ya'ashir, to enrich, to make wealthy. Solomon wasn't being poetic. He was stating a principle that runs through the entire Old Testament. God's favorites were loaded, every single one of them. So why are you broke? That's not an insult, it's a real question. If the blessing makes rich, and Abraham had it, Isaac had it, Jacob had it, why don't you have it? What did they know that you don't? What were they doing that you're not? The poverty gospel says your lack is holy, that God loves your struggle, that your empty bank account proves you're not attached to worldly things. Genesis says otherwise. Genesis shows a God who multiplies livestock, overflows storehouses, and makes his people so prosperous that pagan kings get nervous. Genesis shows a God who attaches material wealth to covenant relationship over and over and over again. And the Lord hath blessed my master greatly, and he is become great, and he hath given him flocks, and herds, and silver, and gold, and men servants, and maidservants, and camels, and asses. Genesis 24:35. That's Abraham's servant describing what God did. Flocks, herds, silver, gold, servants, camels, donkeys. This isn't spiritual blessing. This is an asset portfolio, and God gets the credit. The Lord hath blessed my master greatly. So either God changed his mind about wealth somewhere between Genesis and your pastor's sermon, or somebody's been lying to you. Let's talk about where this lie actually came from. The idea that blessed are the poor means God prefers broke people is a complete misreading. Jesus said, poor in spirit, humble, dependent on God, aware of your need for him. He didn't say poor in bank account. Those are 2 totally different things. But the medieval church loved that confusion. They romanticized poverty because it kept peasants content with nothing while the Vatican hoarded gold behind marble walls. If poor people believed their suffering was holy, they wouldn't ask why the church was so rich. That lie got passed down. Protestants inherited it and baptized it as humility. And now we have entire denominations built on the idea that wanting less makes you more spiritual. But the Old Testament never praises poverty. Not once. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, the destruction of the poor is their poverty. Proverbs 10:15. Wealth is a strong city, a fortress, protection. Poverty is destruction. Solomon didn't romanticize lack. He called it what it is. Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction. Proverbs 13:18. Poverty and shame go together. Not poverty and holiness. Poverty and shame. That's what Scripture actually says. The Hebrew word for poverty is resh. It means want, lack, deprivation. It never shows up in Scripture as something to aspire to. It's always something to escape. Something that results from foolishness or curse or oppression. Never something God celebrates. Every patriarch was wealthy. Every king after God's heart had resources. Every blessed figure in the Hebrew Scriptures had material abundance. The poverty gospel isn't biblical. It's religious propaganda dressed up as humility. Now let's look at the evidence, starting with Abraham. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Genesis 13:2. The Hebrew phrase here is kaved me'od, literally very heavy. In Hebrew thought, weight meant substance, significance, glory. The word for glory, kavod, comes from the same root. Heavy things matter. Light things get blown around. Abraham was heavy with wealth, substantial, significant, full of kavod. And he didn't inherit any of it. He left everything in Ur, walked away from his father's house, his country, everything he knew, because God told him to go. He arrived in Canaan with nothing but a promise, and God built his wealth from scratch. By the time we get to Genesis 24, Abraham's servant is describing the inventory: flocks, herds, silver, gold, servants, camels, donkeys. This reads like a financial statement. These are assets, real, tangible, countable wealth. And notice something else about Abraham. He tithed to Melchizedek before the law ever existed. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand, and he gave him tithes of all. Genesis 14:20. Abraham understood the principle of first fruits before Moses ever wrote it down. He gave a tenth to the priest of God Most High, voluntarily, without being commanded, because he understood something about how heaven's economy works. The Hebrew word for tithe is ma'aser. It comes from the word for 10. But here's what's interesting. Abraham practiced ma'aser 400 years before Sinai. The principle predates the law. It's woven into creation itself. Abraham was also generous in other ways. When he and Lot needed to separate because their combined wealth was too great for the land, Abraham gave Lot first choice. He didn't grab, he didn't hoard, he scattered, and God kept multiplying. And what did God call this wealthy man? Abraham, my friend. Isaiah 41:8. God's friend was a billionaire. Sit with that for a minute. The man God chose to start his covenant people, the man he called friend, was extremely, visibly, undeniably rich. Now let's talk about Isaac. Genesis 26 opens with a famine. The land is dry, the economy is collapsing, everyone is panicking, hoarding, trying to survive. God speaks to Isaac, "Don't go to Egypt, stay here, plant." This makes no sense. You don't plant during a famine. The ground is hard, the rain isn't coming. Every natural indicator says this is the worst possible time to sow seed. Isaac does it anyway. Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year an hundredfold. And the Lord blessed him. Genesis 26:12. Hundredfold. In a famine. That's not natural agriculture. That's supernatural multiplication. The Hebrew phrase is miashirim, 100 measures. He didn't get a modest return. He didn't break even. He got back 100 times what he put in the ground, during the worst economic conditions imaginable. And it didn't stop there. And the man waxed great, and went forward, and grew until he became very great. Genesis 26:13. The Hebrew word for grow here is gadal, to become great, to increase, to magnify. And the text uses it 3 times in 2 verses. He grew. He kept growing. He grew until he was very great. Growth on top of growth on top of growth. For he had possession of flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. Genesis 26:14. The Philistines, pagans who didn't serve Isaac's God, looked at his prosperity and burned with jealousy. The Hebrew word is kana. It means to be zealous, to envy, to covet. Isaac's blessing was so visible that it provoked his enemies. And then comes the kicker. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, "Go from us. for thou art much mightier than we. Genesis 26:16. A king told him to leave, not because Isaac did anything wrong, but because his wealth was intimidating an entire nation. His prosperity made a king nervous. Here's the principle. When everyone else operates in fear, covenant people operate in faith. Isaac planted when others hoarded. He sowed when others saved. And God honored his counterintuitive obedience with supernatural results. What would happen if you obeyed God when the economy looks terrible? When logic says hold back? When everyone else is panicking? Isaac found out. And the answer was hundredfold. Now let's talk about Jacob. Jacob is the underdog story. He didn't start blessed like Isaac. He didn't inherit a legacy like Abraham passed down. Jacob started with absolutely nothing. His own words in Genesis 32:10. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth, which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Read that again. With my staff I passed over this Jordan. He crossed the river with nothing but a walking stick. No flocks, no servants, no silver, just a stick and a prayer. 20 years later, now I am become two bands. His wealth was so massive it had to be split into two separate camps because it couldn't travel together. One group of livestock and servants couldn't even contain it all. How did this happen? It started with a vow. Genesis 28. Jacob is running from Esau. He has nothing. He's sleeping on a rock for a pillow. And he makes a promise to God. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. Genesis 28:20-22. He promised to tithe before he had anything to tithe from. He committed to generosity when he was broke. He made a nadir, a vow, to honor God with wealth he hadn't received yet. That's faith, real faith, not I'll give when I have extra. He gave first, in promise, in commitment, in heart posture, when he had nothing but a rock and a dream. Then Jacob went to work for Laban, and Laban cheated him repeatedly, changed his wages 10 times, tried to manipulate every deal. Jacob could have gotten bitter, could have given up, could have complained that his obedience wasn't working. Instead, he stayed faithful. He worked hard. He applied wisdom. Genesis 30 tells the story of the breeding strategy with the rods. Jacob used practical intelligence combined with divine insight. It wasn't magic. It was wisdom plus faith plus hard work. And look at the result. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and menservants, and camels, and asses. Genesis 30:43. The Hebrew word for increased exceedingly is paratz, to break out, to burst forth, to spread abroad. Jacob's wealth didn't just grow, it exploded, it broke boundaries, it couldn't be contained. Later, Jacob tells his wives what happened. Thus, God hath taken away the cattle of your father, and given them to me. Genesis 31:9. God took wealth from the cheater and transferred it to the covenant man. That's not hustle, that's divine redistribution. Jacob positioned himself through faithfulness, and God handled the transfer. From a walking stick to two camps, from broke runaway to generational patriarch, from nothing to Israel. That's what covenant can do. Here's the new section, approximately 1,000 words. It goes right after the Jacob section ends with, from nothing to Israel. That's what covenant can do. And right before the pattern section starts with, now here's what all three of these men had in common. But here's where people get nervous. Okay, they were wealthy, but isn't that just selfish? Isn't wanting money just greed dressed up in Bible verses? Fair question, wrong assumption. Because when you look at what these men actually did with their wealth, the selfishness argument falls apart. They didn't hoard, they didn't hide, they didn't build bigger barns and retire to the ancient equivalent of a golf course. They used their wealth to rescue, to bless, to reconcile, and to establish God's presence in the earth. Start with Abraham. Genesis 14. His nephew Lot gets captured by a coalition of kings. Lot made some bad decisions, moved to Sodom, and now he's a prisoner of war. Most people would say, that's Lot's problem. He made his bed. Let him lie in it. Abraham doesn't think that way. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Genesis 14:14. 318 trained servants, armed, ready for battle, born in his own house. Where do you think those servants came from? Where do you think the weapons came from? The training? The supplies for a military campaign? Wealth. Abraham's prosperity funded a rescue mission. He didn't sit on his money and quote verses about contentment. He mobilized an army, chased down 4 kings, and brought his family back. That costs money. That requires resources. That takes wealth. And it's not the only time Abraham used what he had for others. Genesis 18. 3 strangers show up at Abraham's tent in the heat of the day. He doesn't know who they are, could be anybody, but watch what he does. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it. And he took butter and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them. Genesis 18:7-8. He killed a calf, prepared a feast, gave them the best of what he had, for strangers. This is lavish hospitality. This is generosity without calculation. And it turned out those strangers were angels. One of them was the Lord himself. Abraham's wealth allowed him to bless visitors in a way a poor man never could. His prosperity created capacity for generosity. And then there's Genesis 23. Sarah dies. Abraham needs a place to bury her. He could have just found a cave somewhere and called it done. Instead, he buys land. And Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver, which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. Genesis 23:16. 400 shekels of silver. Full price, no negotiation. Why does this matter? Because Abraham is planting a flag. He's purchasing permanent territory in Canaan, the land of promise. He's establishing covenant presence. That burial cave became a family tomb. Isaac was buried there. Jacob was buried there. It's still there today. Wealth allowed Abraham to establish a physical, permanent stake in the land God promised. His prosperity became an anchor for generations. Now look at Isaac. Genesis 26 is famous for the 100-fold harvest. But there's another detail in that chapter people skip over. And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. Genesis 26:18. Isaac didn't just build wealth for himself, he dug wells. In a dry land, wells meant life. Water for people, water for livestock, water for crops. The Philistines filled those wells with dirt out of spite, and Isaac dug them again. Then he dug new ones, well after well after well. Genesis 26 records him digging at least 4, Esek, Sitnah, Rehoboth, and the well at Beersheba. This wasn't personal convenience. This was infrastructure. This was blessing the land. Future generations would drink from those wells. Travelers, farmers, entire communities. Isaac's wealth funded wells that served people he'd never meet. And look at what happens at the end of the chapter. The king who told Isaac to leave, because his prosperity was intimidating, comes back to make peace. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. And they rose up betimes in the morning and sware one to another. And Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. Genesis 26:30-31. Isaac threw a feast for his former enemies. He used his wealth to make peace, not war. Generosity disarmed hostility. His prosperity became a bridge instead of a barrier. Now look at Jacob. Genesis 32. He's about to face Esau for the first time in 20 years. The last time they saw each other, Esau wanted to kill him. Jacob is terrified. What does he do? He sends gifts ahead, and he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses and 10 foals. Genesis 32, 13-15. Read that list again. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 donkeys, and 10 foals. That's over 550 animals. A massive fortune, sent ahead as a gift. Jacob used his wealth to reconcile a broken relationship. He didn't hoard it. He didn't protect it. He gave it away, generously, strategically, to heal a wound that had been open for 2 decades. And it worked. Esau's heart softened. The brothers embraced. The conflict ended. Wealth funded reconciliation. One more thing about Jacob. Everywhere he went, he built altars. And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, Genesis 33:20. He bought the land first, then built the altar. His wealth allowed him to establish permanent places of worship, physical locations dedicated to God. See the pattern? Abraham used wealth to rescue, to show hospitality, to establish legacy. Isaac used wealth to build infrastructure, to bless the land, to make peace with enemies. Jacob used wealth to reconcile family and build altars for worship. None of them hoarded. None of them consumed it all on themselves. Their prosperity had purpose beyond their own comfort. That's what covenant wealth looks like. It rescues, it blesses, it reconciles, it builds, it establishes the presence of God in physical places. Your wealth isn't supposed to sit in an account making you feel secure. It's supposed to move. It's supposed to work. It's supposed to accomplish something for the kingdom. The patriarchs understood that. Do you? Now here's what all 3 of these men had in common. First, they all gave before they received. Abraham tithed to Melchizedek before the law commanded it. Jacob vowed to tithe before he had anything. Isaac sowed seed during famine when it made no earthly sense. None of them waited until they had enough to be generous. They gave first, and God multiplied after. This is the opposite of how most people think. Most people say, "When I have more, I'll give more." The patriarchs said, "I'll give now and trust God with the more." Generosity precedes prosperity. You don't give because you're rich. You become rich because you give. Second, they all obeyed against logic. Abraham left his homeland with no map and no destination. Just go to a land I will show you. That's insane by any natural standard. Isaac planted during famine when every agricultural principle said don't. Jacob worked 20 years for a cheater, trusting God to make it right eventually. None of them had guarantees. None of them could see the outcome. They obeyed when it didn't make sense, and that's precisely when supernatural provision showed up. Counterintuitive obedience unlocks supernatural results. When your brain says this is stupid and God says do it anyway, that's the moment where natural meets supernatural. Third, they all had direct relationship with God. Abraham walked with God. God appeared to him, spoke to him, made covenant with him. They had a relationship, not just religion. Isaac had his own encounter at Gerar, Genesis 26:24. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee. Jacob wrestled with God at Peniel, physically grappled with the divine and wouldn't let go until he got a blessing. He walked away with a limp and a new name, Israel. These weren't men who just showed up to temple and went through the motions. They had encounters. They heard God's voice. They responded personally. Intimacy with God produces authority in the earth, including financial authority. You can't separate relationship from resources. The men who walked closest to God walked into the greatest wealth. Fourth, they all built generationally. Abraham blessed Isaac. Isaac blessed Jacob. Jacob blessed 12 sons who became 12 tribes. The wealth compounded. Each generation built on the last. They weren't thinking about their own comfort. They were thinking about their children's children. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. Proverbs 13:22. This is God's design. Covenant wealth isn't just for you, it's for your descendants. The patriarchs understood this. They weren't building for a moment, they were building for a lineage. The Hebrew word for generation is dior. The covenant is multi-generational, so is the wealth. If you're only thinking about this month's bills, you're thinking too small. God thinks in generations. So what does this mean for you? You're a child of Abraham by faith. The same God who blessed him hasn't changed. The same principles that built patriarchal wealth still operate today. Ask yourself honestly, am I giving before I see increase? Or am I waiting until I have enough, which somehow never comes? Am I obeying even when it doesn't make sense? Or only moving when I can see the full picture and calculate the risk? Am I building real intimacy with God? Or just asking Him for stuff when I need something? Am I thinking generationally? Or just trying to survive this month? But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant. Deuteronomy 8:18. God gives you the power. The Hebrew word is coach, meaning strength, ability, capacity, to get wealth. It's not separate from Him. The ability to build wealth comes from God Himself. He gives it so that His covenant can be established in the earth. Let the Lord be magnified, which hath pleasure in the prosperity of His servant. Psalm 35:27. God takes pleasure in your prosperity, not guilt, not suspicion, pleasure. When you prosper, He's magnified. Your wealth glorifies Him when it's built on covenant principles and used for covenant purposes. Your poverty doesn't impress God. It never did. The father of your faith was a billionaire. His son was a billionaire. His grandson was a billionaire. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. The poverty gospel wants you content with lack, so you won't threaten anyone with your abundance. It wants you small and quiet and manageable. But God is looking for people who will steward wealth for His purposes, not hide from it out of false humility. Abraham funded a rescue mission when Lot was captured. Isaac dug wells that blessed entire regions. Jacob built a family that became a nation. What could you build if you stopped apologizing for wanting to prosper? The blessings are still chasing somebody right now. The covenant is still active. The principles still work. Giving before receiving. Obeying against logic. Walking in intimacy. Thinking generationally. You're a child of Abraham. Start acting like it. God favored the wealthy because He made them that way. The question is whether you'll let Him do the same for you.